Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you. So, viewers, today's episode is called A Combination of Hazards. It's episode 208. The debate continues with over 50 scenarios of what happened to Air India Flight 171 on the 12th of June 2025, almost 3 months ago. Viewers are divided on whether this crash was caused by a pilot, a design failure, a maintenance failure, water ingress, electrical problems, hydraulic issues, lithium-ion battery thermal runaway, FADEX, etc. We are all agreed the aircraft crash. We are not even agreed whether it was an accident or sabotage. We are not even agreed whether it was preventable or just an accident waiting to happen. So let's start with this comment from LB 4001. My hubby and I look forward to your daily videos. Excuse the trolls who are just mean. Is there a Nobel Prize in your sphere of expertise? You two deserve one for your expert analysis of the available information. Can't wait for MH370 search to resume in our Southern Hemisphere summer months. Looking forward to your videos then. It's about time MH370 was found. Richard.
Yeah, well, a very kind comment. And unfortunately, I don't think we're in line for a Nobel Prize in any sphere of expertise, but there you go. Um, it would be nice in aviation safety to have a Nobel Prize or something like that. Um, and yeah, LB 4001, I completely agree with you. It is about time MH370 was found. It's been going on for more than 11 years, and it's a long time. India's only been going on for 3 months. If it carries on for 11 years too, then there's something wrong somewhere.
Yeah. Yelia B814, the battery experts and engineers seem to strongly disagree with Richard in prior comments. In fact, the overwhelming top comments were against the theory, yet you guys didn't even discuss them. What happened to presenting top-liked comments? Only when it suits? I enjoy you discussing comments, but are you cherry-picking? So we are not cherry-picking at all, but we try not to have the same questions over and over. We look for contrary views, but new ones, as our regular viewers have heard many of the questions before. Richard, will you not agree?
Yeah. And as we said at the start, we've had over 200 episodes, and some viewers have been with us all of that journey. And of course, there are new viewers joining all the time. And new viewers will not know necessarily that certain questions have been discussed before. So lithium-ion batteries has actually been discussed 79 times in 22 episodes. And we've even devoted a full episode just to the subject, lithium-ion batteries. So, we can't win, can we, on that one, Yelia? In general, I would say there is positive criticism and negative criticism. And we enjoy positive criticism because it is specific, it's actionable, that means we can do something about it, it's balanced, it's respectful. And we unfortunately get quite a bit of negative criticism. It's vague, it's unhelpful, it's one-sided, it can even be sarcastic, ridiculing, or attacking. So, in general, if you think we're picking out the positive criticism and ignoring the negative criticism, I suppose you could accuse us of cherry picking. And we are very grateful for viewers who take the time to exercise positive criticism when they don't agree with us. and they make a comment that is specific, and you know what someone's talking about, and it is actionable, and you can do something about it. And the sweeping statements like we got it all wrong, or it's all nonsense, or it's bullshit, is neither specific nor actionable. So, yes, we do ignore those type of statements. And we also ignore one sided statements. Everything in India is corrupt, or Boeing cannot make a safe aircraft. Those are just really not helpful and not true. We will take a certain level of sarcasm, but outright personal attacks will not be tolerated. And if you believe that accepting constructive criticism and ignoring destructive criticism is cherry picking, then yes, I put my hand up and say we're cherry picking. But I would add, this is not a popularity contest. We do not measure the themes we address by the number of views and likes and replies. What we do is download all the comments and search for themes that interest the majority of viewers. And that has changed over the last 3 months. At the start, the pilots were the focus, and then it was the fuel switches were the focus. And then it moved to questions about the preliminary report when that came out. And then it moved to Air India operations and Air India maintenance. So there are a lot of different themes and a lot of different directions that interest the viewers in general.
In fact, Richard, every single episode that we do address criticism from viewers. In fact, I would suggest that about 70% at least of the questions that we do raise and field are criticisms or contrary views, and there's only a small smattering of you know positive sort of comments. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we do our best to have a balance between positive and negative, and people who agree and people who disagree.
Mm. So, Richard, talking about people who strenuously disagree, Richard Lewis 4288 said he's an aircraft mechanic, and I says, I strenuously disagree that a loss of fuel boost pump pressure will shut down the engines. And RGJ987, firstly, amazing work. My question, even if the main fuel pumps failed due to electrical supply, is there not a fail-safe gravity feed from the tanks to the engines, thus preventing flameout? And his second question, it is recorded that the cut-off switches will move to cut-off, but what is the mechanism for this recording? Could an untrue cut-off have been recorded due to the mentioned electrical problems? Can you do an in-depth analysis of the workings of these switches? To which John Isley 4578 replied, although the engines are equipped with engine-driven fuel pumps, EDPs, they are significantly supported by electrical pumps to guarantee sufficient fuel flow. In the event of a complete failure of the electrical pumps, the system would depend on gravity feed and the EDPs. However, because of the elevated nose attitude combined with the high power setting, the engines would experience flameout due to the inadequate fuel supply provided solely by the EDPs. It is important to note that the centre tank is not suitable for gravity feed. Only the main tanks can be utilised. Hope this helps. Richard, perhaps you can sort those three comments out?
Yeah, well, John Isley has certainly helped with his contribution. And fuel switches have been discussed 320 times in 63 episodes on the Air India crash. And our 17-page report includes an in-depth analysis of the fuel switches and their operation, and with diagrams. The switches are mentioned 28 times on 10 different pages in that report. So Richard Lewis, unfortunately, does not explain why he strenuously disagrees, So this is a good example of negative criticism, unspecific and inactionable. RGJ 987 asked two specific questions. Those have been answered before, and we'll answer them again. John Isley has already provided part of the answer. So there are AC electrically driven boost pumps, and both engines are driven by a engine-driven fuel pump, an EDFP. When fuel pumps fail, gravity feed and suction feed do work, but they are not reliable and they do not work under all circumstances. When a boost pump fails, the GE NX1B engine can rely on suction feeding and to some extent gravity to draw fuel to the engine, especially at low altitudes and when the flight profile is favorable. However, as John points out, at takeoff and climb, the thrust demand is at its highest, and there is a nose-high attitude and a low differential pressure, and that can render gravity feed ineffective and potentially leading to an engine flameout. The second question, what is the mechanism of recording the fuel switches? Well, there are two fuel switches and they have two independent signal paths, one via a relay and one via a data bus to the engines and the engine control systems. The data bus is fed also to the flight data recorder. So each switch was recorded moving from run to cutoff and subsequently back from cutoff to run. That's a total of 4 movements, which are recorded in the FDR. There is no failure mode where both switches and both signal paths and the 4 switch movements could all be fail simultaneously or be misrecorded. So I think we can rule out that scenario. So we are convinced the engines both failed in the sense of a flame out or shutdown. They didn't fail in the sense there was any damage to the engine. They were successfully relit. And we are also convinced the fuel switches were physically and mechanically moved. They weren't just simply misread, misrecorded, misinterpreted, and they certainly weren't moved automatically because that can't happen.
Mm. So then Martin Trudeau, 6948, asks, if lack of maintenance was the root cause for the crash, then that maintenance should be done. If the battery containment did not prevent water from entering into the battery container, that must be fixed. Richard's hypothesis that the water could have entered the battery container and that caused corrosive gas via thermal runaway, the engines to fail and the rat to deploy, it all makes sense. Richard explains how the water could have travelled to the rear of the aircraft when the battery pack, where the battery pack was, and when the plane was rolled to take off. And this is when the failure happened. Geoffrey brought up the electrical issues that existed before AI 171 had taken off. Thank you, gentlemen. Richard.
Yeah, and India has taken 7 Boeing 787-8 out of operation, so I presume the maintenance work is being done. I see, however, no public evidence that the wider issue that we raised of a combination of hazards is being considered and addressed. There is, however, some confidential information that has been leaked to us this morning that the combination of hazards is currently being analyzed, and we're not just talking about water ingress or fire or chemical hazards, as we discussed yesterday. We're also talking about electromagnetic interference and high frequency HF hazards that we have previously discussed.
Yeah. And Curious Crow MP4CX asks two interesting questions, Richard. Dear Geoffrey and Richard, I think your tentative conclusion is well founded as presented by Richard, and my money is on your hypothesis being proven to be true. Indeed, there is only one question I have, and it's about the slow acceleration. Could this have occurred as a result of the electrical faults generated by the water interfering with the FADEC or other systems causing intermittent faults with the braking system, the so-called brake drag? Also, I wonder if you might comment on the changes Air India have with their maintenance operations. As I understand it, maintenance operations were divided amongst several providers, with AIE SL being based locally, providing day-to-day maintenance, and the technical arms of Turkish Airways and Lufthansa doing the more complex tasks. Air India announced last month it was bringing maintenance in-house with the assistance of Singapore Airlines, who is now a shareholder. AIESL is owned and run by the Indian state. To what extent might this slippery eel of maintenance quality control at Air India and the non-appearance of the maintenance logs be attributed to this situation? Great discourse, Richard and Geoffrey. Richard.
Yeah, raised several issues. The FADECs are housed in the engines, not in the EE bays. So the electrical braking system is completely independent of the FADECs. So I don't see how water ingress in the EE bay would affect the FADECs housed in the engines. You're quite correct. India has a $400 million program to retrofit the entire Boeing 787-8 fleet, and that's already started in Victorville in California. And on top of that program, heavy maintenance work is being carried out currently in Abu Dhabi by Etihad Engineering and in Amman by Joramco. And Lufthansa Technik does provide total component support, TCS, for the Air India Boeing 777 fleet under a contract signed in July 2024. And Turkish Technik has had a maintenance agreement with Air India that is also just for the Boeing 777 fleet and not the 787 Dreamliners. But this agreement with Turkish Technic is being wound down. And you're also right, India is bringing maintenance functions back to local in-house facilities, and Singapore Airlines is actively supporting the airline in this transition and lending its MRO know-how and helping raise maintenance standards, especially at scale. And currently, $167 million is being spent on a new MRO facility at Bengaluru Airport. So we'll be very interested to see how these different programs play out in the coming months.
Richard, Joe Costica, 1296. Gentlemen, there is much discussion on other channels about how and when the rat deploys with regard to engine shutoff. It has been claimed that one engine shutdown does not cause the rat to deploy, but that a dual engine shutdown does just that, and the rat deploys immediately. There are some claims that the rat only deploys when the engines spool down to a certain point. My understanding is that the RAT is an emergency system which restores electrical and hydraulic power when such power is lost. Why would there even be a lag in deployment of the RAT while it waits for an engine to spool down? My second question concerns the fuel cut-off switches. As an old programmer, I would think in a takeoff mode, when all power is being used to get the aircraft up, it would be impossible to starve the engines of fuel. Even if I intentionally shut off the switches, it wouldn't allow me to starve the engines of fuel because too many onboard conditions are prevailing. Why would I ever be allowed to shut off fuel to the engines at such a critical point of flight? I would program against this ever being allowed to occur. Thank you again for superb coverage, Richard.
Yeah, well, Joe, I'm afraid it's a bit more complicated than you make out, and it seems you've been well and truly confused by conflicting reports in social media. So, start with the rat deployment. There are four specifically defined circumstances. One of those is when both engines shut down to below idle. Another is when all three hydraulic systems, the left, center, and right, fail. And there are other specific circumstances on takeoff and on landing. So you need to know that the reason that the engine has to go down to idle before the rat deploys, and both engines have to get down to idle, is, well, if it's only in one engine, the second engine is perfectly capable of flying the aircraft. And you will then declare an emergency and land back safely at the airport of departure. If both engines fail, then the main battery is designed to fully power the aircraft for the 10 seconds it takes for the rat to come online. So there's absolutely no interruption of electrical power. First the engine powers, then the battery, and then the rat powers. And you can also start the APU, and that will provide the necessary power. So there's backup to the backup. And you then say, why would you, as an old programmer, ever allow the fuel switches are switched off? Well, the reason the fuel switches are there is in case of an engine fire. And if there's an engine fire, you want to switch off the fuel, because otherwise you'll have an explosion of the fuel. And risking an explosion of the fuel tank in the wing, then you not only lose the engine, but you lose the wing. And then you have an immediate crash, and there's nothing a pilot can do to save the aircraft. So the reason for the fuel switches is if there is an engine fire. And was there a fire? Definitely not in either engine. But we say there was a fire in the tail area around the EAFR, in the tail of the aircraft. There is evidence from the EAFR of a completely damaged flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, which is designed to withstand 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained high temperature and flames. So there was something going on. And then the question is, why were the fuel switches recycled? It could have been because that forces the FADEC to do the relight sequence. So you need to go through it step by step. And that's why we wrote our 17-page report, to take you through it step by step.
Yeah. So, Baraka Boy 65. Gentlemen, if Richard's hypothesis of the events leading up to and ultimately the cause of the crash is correct, then this is surely also known now by the investigators. This, I assume, would have led to a worldwide inspection of the whole 787 fleet, if not the grounding. In these days of social media links, I would have thought we'd be aware of this had it been the case. Thank you.
Yeah, well, There have been ADs released and issued for the global Boeing 787 fleet to inspect and repair where necessary, not just on the water ingress issue, on other issues. And we also know that seven Boeing 787-8 aircraft have been voluntarily grounded by Air India and are currently under heavy maintenance and repair. So it hasn't been a worldwide grounding of the 787 fleet because obviously the investigators have concluded it is not a fundamental design or manufacturing flaw with the Boeing. It is a issue of maintenance and lack of maintenance, specifically on particular Air India aircraft, and that's why seven aircraft have been grounded.
Mm. Guy-UK, do we have any history of this aircraft prior to the incoming flight? Any more electrical issues would be very informative. Good point
Yeah.
from Guy.
Good point indeed. And of course, we know about the prior flight, but we haven't heard of any directly on the previous days and weeks. But we have heard many people, passengers, talking about cabin service issues and air conditioning and flickering lights. And that's not just the survivor on the Air India crash who talked about flickering lights, that's also passengers on previous flight talking about flickering emergency lights. So there are quite clearly some issues with the aircraft. When you go back through the aircraft's history, and we went back through the previous year of flights, then the only interruptions in operation of that aircraft were when it was in for standard maintenance checks. Apart from that, the aircraft had been fully utilized. So there are circumstances where you can put a minimum equipment list together, and issues can be deferred to the next flight or the next week or the next maintenance schedule. So it's not a very clear situation unless we get the maintenance logs, and those will tell us exactly what issues were outstanding on this particular aircraft, what was fixed and what was not fixed. And that's why we're calling for the maintenance logs to be published.
So Catherine Coplet 9173 asks, can you please show a schematic of a Boeing 787 as I'm not familiar with it? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I don't think you fit one schematic of a Boeing 787 in your house. It will be very large. But there are several schematics in our 17-page report. We go through the electrical system, the fuel switches. So I suggest that's a good start. And if you then want other schematics, I have hundreds. So just write to me. The email address is in the description below, and I will send you the schematics that you're interested in.
So Pete Braun, 9439, dear gentlemen, thank you for your great work regarding Air India crash. I think the possible theory regarding water ingress is possible, but I have one comment about the battery. As a developer in the field of lithium technology, but not in aviation, we have a principle. If the normal operating parameters are exceeded, the battery is always separated from the outside world long ahead of any damage. I would also expect this to happen in aviation for safety reasons long before a fire damages the battery. But how can the APU be supplied for the start when the battery was already on fire? Do you have information about this topic? Apologies if the answer has already been discussed, but I have not been able to review all the hours of your investigation. Richard.
Well, there's only 200, so that's about
Yeah.
100 hours.
What's wrong with you? Yeah.
Take you a week. What have you been doing? No, we. Sorry to joke. It's a serious comment, Pete, and
It
thank you
is.
for that. The APU inlet door was not fully opened. It normally opens to 90 degrees to the aircraft surface, and it wasn't. It was only about 45 degrees. So the question is whether the APU battery may have failed during the APU auto start sequence. And when it battery failed, the auto start sequence stopped. The main battery is, however, a backup if the APU battery fails. So you can still start the APU on the main battery. It is always a combination of events and failures. And yeah, we have discussed it before, and we will discuss it again. But your basic question is, if it was on fire, how did it manage to start the APU? Well, the APU didn't actually start, and we're not sure because we don't have the FDR data whether the APU auto start sequence was stopped and underway, started, but not completed. So the jury is out on that one until we get the FDR data.
Richard, Simon Hyatt 2157 says your analysis and prognosis is a vital piece of work to pressurize the truth to eventually surface. Air India will be fully aware of the cause of this accident by now, and your dedication to uncovering the truth will ensure that they are held to account at all levels. And Grandad Guitar, thank you, Geoffrey and Richard, for your dedication to the truth of this disaster. For me, the damage to the rear flight recorder suggests chemical destruction. Richard.
Yeah, well, we do know that the NTSB and the AAIB UK were in India, and we know that they left and went home before the preliminary report was published because they already knew what the cause of the crash was. There was no finding against either Boeing or General Electric in the preliminary report. And it will be very interesting to see what the final report from AAIB India states.
Well, let's finish with these, Richard, from Daryl Case 88. This is an amazing series of videos and analysis. Not only does it serve the public who need answers, but also informs and educates us about airplane engineering and design. I'm fascinated by the intricacies of modern aircraft and amazed by the incredible engineering of Boeing aircraft. Though the story of this disaster is sad, it is also reassuring and comforting to me as a member of the flying public to know so much effort has been put into making us safe. Your efforts are a continuation of the pursuit of safety. Thank you. And R.A. Jarry, 1335, great work, really incomparable, encyclopedic knowledge, tremendous logic. I think he's talking about you, Richard, not me. And Reborn Rocker Vids, that's an interesting name. I thought there was a second balloon on Richard's background. It turned out to be a speck on my phone screen. Need to clean your phone screen, Reborn. Yeah,
Yeah,
lovely comments, Richard.
lovely comments, and thank you for those kind words. And we can always make sure the balloon moves. So make sure you're not sure that it's a spot
Yeah.
in the screen.
Yeah, yeah. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed for answering the questions from the viewers today. Really appreciate your tremendous work and research you've done. So, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And viewers, thank you very much for watching. We do appreciate your support. Please subscribe to us. Please do support us. We support responsible journalism. And do keep those wonderful comments coming. We do appreciate them very much. And those great questions. They're fabulous. And we'll be back tomorrow with another episode, and we're going to be looking at the wiring on a 787. That's going to be fascinating. We're going to take you on a tour of the 787 and behind the nice curtains and behind the nice sidewalls and under the floor and in the ceiling, and you're going to get a good look at it. So that'll be a really great episode that we're going to work on. And then we're going to take a day off on Thursday, I think. But that's the plan. So we do look forward to your company tomorrow, and have a great evening. Take care.